Okay, we are live, and I am just really excited about today. My name is Ross Gutler. I'm the CEO of the Open Center, and I'm just honored, excited, intrigued, curious, happy, every beautiful word out there that I'm sitting here today with John Perkins, author of his new book, Touching the Jaguar. And we're going to have a really free-flowing conversation today, John, because as we were just discussing a little bit, you and I, we have a lot in common. My path has crossed yours multiple times in life. And, you know, the reason we're here today is the Open Center has been the longest running urban holistic center in the country we're going on almost 37 years in the heart of New York City. Now a fully digital company, which is really weird to say. We were zero digital before. Now we are fully digital. And I think that even the idea of being digital may be something that enters into our conversation later. But you've got this book that just came out. I finished it this morning. And you've written a lot of books, actually. So maybe tell us a bit about your path toward this recent book without giving away too much, because you do talk about the path in the book.
Yes, Ross. Well, thank you. And it's great to be with you. And actually, I'm so glad the Open Center is taking this pioneering path of going into digital. And it's actually back in the 80s was after the first book I wrote of 10 books that I've written came out. The first place I gave a major workshop was the Open Center. So it's really nice to be part of this new groundbreaking experiment that we're having, or experience we're having with virtual. So really this whole path started for me back when I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador. And I was living in Shuar territory with these people, the Shuar, who were indigenous people, hunters and gatherers. And at one point I got very ill. I was dying. I couldn't keep down any food. And it was a 3-day horrendously difficult journey to the nearest medical facility. And there was no way I could do it. I couldn't even stand up on my own. And that night a shaman healed me. And I can go into the details if you want, but basically what he did was help me understand that my perceptions were ruling my reality. It was my perceptions of the food and drink that was so different from anything I was used to, were really making me ill. And so after that, he required that I become his apprentice. This is 1969. I've just graduated from business school. I'd never even heard of a shaman until I got there. And I had no interest in being a shaman's apprentice. There was no future in shamanism in 1969. Nobody ever really heard of it hardly. So, but he saved my life. So I became his apprentice. And what he taught me that night, the experience I had that night on this vision quest I was on, when that first night of the healing with him, at some point, I'm in this vision quest. I'm on a shamanic journey, and I see this amorphous form out in front of me. And the shaman yells at me, "Touch the Jaguar." And I'm in the middle of the jungle, you know, it's night, I'm terrified, I'm looking all around, where's the Jaguar? And he says, no, close your eyes and see the Jaguar and touch it. I did. This amorphous form shapeshifted into a Jaguar, and I'm always touching the Jaguar these days. You see, we're the Jaguar.
I love the colors of the shirts.
Yeah. So when I touched the Jaguar, I heard a voice saying, it was probably like the voice of my mother saying, "Son, the food and drink will kill you." And I realized, you know, in the Amazon, people don't drink water, river water, because the rivers are filled with organic matter. They know this, falling trees, rotting debris, rotting foliage. The women make a kind of beer called chicha by chewing and spitting the manioc root, and it ferments into alcohol. And then you can add water, and you can drink it. Right. And they eat very, very strange foods like squirming white grubs. And
oh no, hey Jack, my shit, it said it got too hot. Oh no.
I can hear you. Should I just keep going? I'm going to keep going. So anyway, on this shamanic journey, I see these, I see how incredibly healthy the Shuar are, very robust, very vital people. They're just filled with energy, filled with life. And they're eating these same squirming white grubs and spit beer. And so that night I understood that it wasn't the food and drink that were killing me, it was my perception. And many of the Shuar incidents live to be very old if they don't die in hunting accidents or something like that. So I understood there was a perception that was creating a reality that was making me sick. And a couple of days later, the shaman came back to me and said, "Hey, you're healed." And I was. And he said, "You need to become my apprentice." That was his demand. They had no currency. There was nothing else I could offer him. This was a barter society. I had nothing to barter with. So, and I had no interest in being a shaman, but he saved my life. So I studied with him. And one of the first things he taught me was, he said, "You know, touching the Jaguar means that you identify your barriers, your fears, and then you touch them. You don't run from them. You confront them. You face whatever it is that's holding you back. And once you do that, you change your perception. And when you change your perception, you receive the kind of energy, wisdom, whatever it is you need to change your reality. And then you take the actions to make that happen." And you know, Ross and everybody out there, I think you're back now, Ross. Hi. Good to see you back.
I am back. My Mac overheated and it stopped using. It's got to cool down before I can use it again.
Yeah, well,
I'm on my phone.
It's a little bit like the ice caps. It's overheating. You know, it's sending a message: get out of the sun.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so after that, I trained with a shaman for a year or so. And then I went up into the Andes and trained with shamans in the Andes, Quechua shamans. And you know some of these people, Ross, you've been with them recently. And then later I became an economist, an economic hitman. I've written the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, about that experience. And we can go into how that relates to all this if you want. But as I did that, I would, every time I would be in a place like Indonesia or Iran or Egypt or all over the Americas, I would try to spend some time getting to know shamans in the area and understanding them. And what I learned is that all over the world, there's this common connection of shamans, that they all know that our reality is molded by our perceptions. And actually, that's the basis for modern psychotherapy. It's the basis for quantum physics. It's the basis for business, marketing, advertising.
Right.
You know, it's the basis for everything, that our perceptions create basically all the human institutions that we have. And that gives us great hope about changing the world, which is what this book, Touching the Jaguar, and I just happen to have a copy. I love the subtitle, Transforming Fear into Actions to Change Your Life and the World.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the shaman taught me way back in 1969.
You know, we were just going through before we got on the call. I'm here at the home of our director of marketing, and we're going through a marketing exercise, and we're just talking around crystallizing the mission. And the thing is, when you keep asking that exercise of continue asking why until you really get to the issue, and it is the subtitle of your book, which is trying to transform our own lives for the purpose of healing the world, and allowing the human population to live in harmony with the world. Like the earth will continue whether we're here or not. I think there's maybe the idea of like, are we going to blow it up? Like, no, it'll just be a different type of planet, but we may not continue.
Yeah. Well, Ross, I think you were just recently with a wonderful woman shaman in the high Andes, a Quechua shaman named Maria Juana, the great name, Maria Juana Yamberla. Well, I've known Maria Juana for decades. And one time, not too long ago, I took a group to Maria Juana and I was translating, and somebody in the group said, "So Maria Juana, how do we save the earth?" And she laughed and she said, "You know, the earth isn't in danger. We people are, and we're likely to take other species with us. We're just like so many fleas. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us all off." And then Marijuana points up at Imbabura, this volcano that hovers over her home. And she says, you know, a few years ago, that volcano was covered by a massive ice cap. It isn't anymore. Pachamama, the earth, is speaking to us. She's twitching. She hasn't shaken us off yet, but she's twitching. We better listen.
Mm.
And every time we've been hit by a major hurricane or earthquake or tsunami or one of these other once in 100-year events that seem to hit us every year or so,
Yeah.
I thought about this, about how that's the earth speaking to us, but we've taken those as local events. So if I survive a hurricane, I expect that the outside world is going to come to my rescue in a few days or maybe a couple of weeks. I'm going to get bottled water and food and help, and then we're going to return to normal. Well, this coronavirus is not a local event. It's global. We've all been hit by it. It's the most recent twitch of Pachamama, and we're all being impacted by it. There is no outside world to come to our rescue. This is a major message from the earth. So we're getting a little distracted because the camera seems to keep moving back and forth here. Are we okay?
Did I get? I'm trying to see if I got back in on my laptop here, but I don't know if that happened.
Well, yeah, I see you a lot. You're in.
There's multiple ones of me. Okay, hold on. Let's see here.
No, just one of you. But when I was talking, you were on. I think usually when the person talks, they're on. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We keep going.
Okay, let's see.
I think we should, though, stress to the people watching that by the time we do the workshop in a few weeks, it's a day-long workshop, it's an evening lecture, and a day-long workshop, we will have these technical problems straightened out.
Yeah. Now, this is a problem because I'm in someone else's backyard that I'm not used to doing this. And my laptop overheated and it shut down. I got the message from Mac, your laptop's too hot. Let's see. Yes, my friend Lauren is saying, yes, Lauren, yes, you can let me back in on the laptop. Okay. Now,
You know, Ross, if it's easier, I can just keep going. I got lots of stories.
We should be good now. Look, I want to come back to something. So you've really lived two different lives, you know, and I know you are living this life you are now because of the first life you led as an economic hitman. And the interesting piece for me, what I feel is my connection to you is I've had that same almost dual life of I was an economics major and thought I was going to spend I wanted to be an investment banker. And, you know, I love just the idea of business and economics, especially macroeconomics and geopolitical issues and how they impacted the economy. And your role as chief economist, you know, when you were at Maine, like what a dream role to anybody that majors in economics. And yet here I am now running a spiritual practice and personal growth center. And here you are writing books, and we both spend time going, I mean, you way more than me, going to the Amazon. And so it's interesting that in a way you have been a contributor or an influential figure in opening my eyes to seeing things differently. So I wanted to go back to your point on perception, Marijuana's point on perception. I read your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I was also a history minor. So actually the book was perfect for me, an economics major and a history minor. And you shifted the way I looked at global events. And you also reference in this book your relationship to Howard Zinn, which I think I had forgot. Reading people's history of the United States was also very influential for me, however many years ago I read it. So you helped, I think, develop my perception of things in that arena. And going to the Amazon and spending time with some of the shamans that you've helped introduce to the Americans and others has also opened my eyes a lot. So I guess I'm saying thank you because I really feel I owe you a lot of gratitude. And so maybe I had a question of, for, we're an urban center. We exist in New York. For people that might not have the means to travel to places like the Amazon, what are steps you think they might be able to take to seek the harmony that I think your books so really beautifully illuminate, that harmony needed for ourselves in relationship to other beings, human and non-human beings, and relationship to the earth? Like, to me, that's the core of what you get from your book, is we need this harmony.
Yeah. Yeah. So before I start, I just we may hear some sounds in the background. I have this baby Jaguar that joins me here. Give me a lot of energy. Her name is Jagita. Hi, Jagita. And she looks like a baby Jaguar. She's actually an American, and she's 10 weeks old. She's absolutely adorable. And anyway, if you hear noise in the background, that's Jagita.
Gotcha.
So here's a story. The first shaman I ever brought to the United States to speak was one his name was Jose Joaquin Pineda. He's from the high Andes, he's Quechua. He was coming to speak at the Open Center, this first speech, and I picked him up at JFK and drove him in a taxi. And before we were going to the Open Center, I thought he might like to see some trees. So I asked the taxi driver to take us to Central Park, and we stop at Central Park and get out. And Jose Joaquin does not walk into Central Park. He walks across the street to this big building. And he goes up to the building and he puts his arms around the building and he says, "This building has really nice energy." And I said, "Well, that's cool. I don't think most people think of it that way." And he said, "Well, wait a minute. You bring people to Ecuador and they hug trees, and I think that's good. But if they don't feel the spirit of their own buildings, there's something wrong here. You must have problems in this city." And to me that was so important, because we realized, and a few hours later, hey, it's okay. A few hours later, he was speaking at the Open Center, and he was explaining how all these buildings are made out of nature.
Yeah.
Cement. Everything in these buildings is one of the four elements: earth, air, water, fire. And our bodies, of course, are all earth, air, water, fire. And so it doesn't matter where you are, you can feel that connection to nature. And it's all about spirit. It's all about spirit. It's the spirit of the plants. It's the spirit of the buildings. It's the spirit of this cat. It's the spirit of the squirrel that's outside my window right now looking in at the cat. It's all about spirit. And I wrote this book, Touching the Jaguar, to connect the 5 books I'd written on shamanism: Shape-Shifting, The World is As You Dream It, Psychonavigation, etc., with the 4 books I'd written on global economics: Confessions of the Economic Hitman, Hoodwinked, etc. This is the bridge, because to me they were always totally connected. But I would speak at big international economic forums, like when I recently spoke at in St. Petersburg, Russia, with 12,000 people. I would speak at these events, and people would come up to me during the reception and say, "Hey, I Googled you. You're not the same guy that wrote those woo-woo books on shamanism, are you?" And then I would speak at, the Open Center or someplace on shamanism, and people would come and say, "You're not that jerk who was an economic hitman, are you?" And to me, there was always this connection. There was never explicit in any of the books, but because all of it is about using perception to change reality.
Yeah.
Right now, the business world, my world, when I was an economic hitman, I was a player in creating what we now call a death economy, an economic system that's based on maximizing short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. But that's only a perception of what we should do. So to move from a death economy to a life economy, an economic system that cleans up pollution, that pays people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, to create new technologies that are regenerative. All we have to do is change the perception. The goal is not to maximize short-term profits, but to maximize long-term benefits for people and nature. We only have to change the perception, and that'll change everything, because global climate change, all the income inequality, the racial discrimination, species extinction, forest destruction, the coronavirus, all of these things are symptoms. They're problems,
Right.
but they're not the problem. They're symptoms of the problem, which is this death economy, an economic system that's destroying itself. And so we change the perception. And then, of course, we have to work hard to take actions to actually make it happen. But so this book is about this. The events that I'll do at the Open Center in several weeks will really help people go into what is your individual role in making this happen. What can we do collectively? And there's a lot we can do collectively, but also there's a daily practice that comes out of all of this. And we'll go into that deeply in the workshop that asks each of us, what can you do? So Ross, as the leader of the Open Center, there's things you can do. As a writer, there's things I can do, but a plumber can do things, a carpenter can do things, a parent can do things, teachers do things. So we each explore what is our individual role that'll bring us the greatest personal satisfaction in our lives, that will take us to, as Joseph Campbell said, our bliss. And also, how do we tie that in with creating a better world for our children, our grandchildren, for future generations? Because that always makes us happier when we do those two things together. What are the Jaguars that stand in our way? What are the fears, the barriers that stand in our way? And when we touch those Jaguars, those fears, how does it change our perception so that we can then take the actions to move into this new life we want to create for ourselves and for the world?
In the workshop, will you go through how people identify what their personal Jaguars are? And I think there's a reference to I had written it down here. Reality 1 versus reality 2.
Yes, yeah, that's it. Yeah, so actually the shaman taught me that. So if you go back,
which shaman was it?
well, this was in the Amazon when I was so sick. I mean, many of them have taught me the same thing, but the beginning one was with the Schwa shaman deep in the Amazon. So, reality 1 is squirming white grubs and spit beer, a perception bridge. And he describes this as a bridge. It'll make my mother's voice. It'll make me sick. It'll kill me. Takes me to reality 2. I'm sick. But if I take the same reality 1, spit beer and squirming white grubs, and put a new reality, that's organic. That's local. That's nutritious food. It's making the schwa healthy. It can make me healthy. It takes me to a new reality, which is I get healthy. And the shaman said, standing on that bridge is a Jaguar that tries to hold us back. So there's always a voice or something trying to hold us back from change. Human beings, we don't like change. We fear change. There's these barriers, these voices saying, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You don't have enough education. Whatever it is, the voices out there. But when you touch that Jaguar, it tells you, oh, you can change. And in my case, it changed to, oh, but the schwa are really healthy. They're eating these foods. So how come they get the same basic digestive systems that I have? And, we go through this process and, so let me just give it another example of a carpenter, the opposite. So a writer and a carpenter. So if I were to say, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? What'll bring me the greatest satisfaction? I like to write. I love to write. I have a friend who's a carpenter. He's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. He doesn't like to write, but he loves to work with his hands in wood. And then the second question is, how do I tie that in with the bigger world? How do I help other people? And as a writer, I'd say I tell stories to inspire people to change their lives and the world.
Like me.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Exactly. And then the carpenter says, well, I want to use sustainable materials. And the Jaguar. So the third question is, what's stopping you? What are the barriers? As a writer, I might say, I don't have enough time. The carpenter might say, my clients don't want to spend a little extra money on sustainable materials. When you then the fourth question is, how do I touch that Jaguar? How does it change my perceptions? As a writer, I say, well, I could get up half an hour earlier and write, or I could watch an hour less of television at night and write. The carpenter, the Jaguar says to the carpenter, hey, tell your clients, this is the added price of sustainable materials is not a cost, it's an investment in the future. They're investing in their future and their children's future. And then the fifth question is, what actions do I take every day? So a writer writes, a carpenter goes out and does his work, but he says to his people, he doesn't have to write poetry, he doesn't have to be eloquent, but he says, hey, look, tell your kids, we built this cabinet. You put a little bit more money into it because it's sustainable materials, but it's an investment in their future, just like an education is, or so many other things. But we can all go through that process. It doesn't matter what role you have in life. We all go through that process. And when we do, we create a better world for ourselves. And we also participate in creating a better world for others. It's beautiful. I love it. You know, it's so beautiful and it's so shamanic, and it's also the basis for modern psychotherapy, for quantum physics, or everything.
And I think what you're illuminating there is someone might be sitting at home thinking, how do I change the world? I'm a carpenter. And it's about perception. Well, if you can perceive what you do and the way you do it, as like you figure out how it makes little changes. Every single person doesn't have to write books like you do that reach millions and millions of people. There's many ways to make a difference.
Right.
We don't always perceive it like that, though. So I think that flows, you know, that for the people at home that are just thinking, God, what do I do? I work for some big multinational company and I'm in middle management or whatever. What can I do to change the world? You don't have to think to yourself, oh my God, I have to change the world with one stroke.
Correct.
Making micro changes.
Right. And, you know, and we can all actually participate in another way. And that is, I can't tell you how many executives have come up to me after I've given speeches during a reception over a glass of wine or whatever and said, hey, you know, I want to be greener. I want my company to be greener. I got kids, I got grandchildren. I want my company to be greener, but I know that if I lose 0.5% of market share, my main stockholders will fire me and replace me with someone who only cares about market share. So please go out and tell all your listeners to send me emails or tweets or whatever, and send them to all their social networking circles and say something like, hey, I love your products, but I'm not going to buy them anymore until you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair wage, or clean up the pollution you've caused, or whatever. Pick a company. Every one of your listeners can pick a company that they'd like to see change and send them a nice email saying, I like what you got, but I ain't going to buy it anymore until you whatever. And send that to all their networking circles and ask them to send it to all theirs. And all of these people send those emails. And these company executives will tell me, hey, if I've got 100,000 of these, I can take these to the Wall Street. I can take these to my main stockholders and say, you know, we got to listen to our customers.
Do you see there? So let's think about the general economy, the way it works now, the way our version of capitalism works. As an economics major, I would say, well, we don't have pure capitalism because we've got a lot of regulations, and that would not be pure capitalism in its purest form. But do you see a path toward, let's say, moving away from short-term profiteering as the goal? Let's say we move away from GDP or GNP, moving toward, I've heard, like a global happiness index, a global well-being index. And I think there's a few maybe Scandinavian countries that have focused on something like that. Do you see a path toward that maybe becoming the dominant the dominant metric that we look to drive our behavior toward?
Yes, it has to be that way, or we're not going to survive. And I do see it happening. You know, the benefit corporations, B corporations. My publisher was the first publishing company to be a B corporation, a benefit corporation also. The Green New Deal, conscious capitalism, places like the Open Center, nonprofits and local, and all the movements. And, you know, in August, last August, 192 of the world's most powerful executives came together at what's called the Business Roundtable. And they made a statement that basically supports a life economy. They said we can no longer be about maximizing short-term profits alone. We've got to look at the long term. We've got to pay our employees better. We've got to take better care. We have health insurance and so on, and take better care of the communities where we work. They said this. Now it's up to all of us to go out there and make sure they do it, because they need to be forced to do it in their own way. And yes, we must move out of this system that we're in, which really is, it's not just not a form of true capitalism, it's truly a form of oligarchy. We've created an oligarchy. But the United States has gone through 3 previous oligarchies. And the first one was the British, the East India Company, which really controlled everything in the United States. And that generated the Revolutionary War. The second was the rise of the feudal oligarchic state in the South, the Confederacy. And that generated the Civil War. And then the third was from the late 1800s up until the 1930s, we had this rise of a new oligarchic system. The Great Depression and World War II and Franklin Roosevelt ended that. It ended. And then this one started really pretty much during Reagan's time. And it's been growing ever since. And now, but each time that we've moved out of that there's been these cycles, but each time it's taken some major impetus. And I think the coronavirus is that impetus. People are afraid of change. That's one of our fears. That's one of the Jaguars we all have to touch. We don't like change. We've all made huge changes in the last several months. We've realized that we may not enjoy some of these changes. We may be getting sick of them, but we can change, and we can see that we can now do workshops. We're going to do a very, very powerful workshop where people are going to do shamanic journeys. We're going to do ceremonies. We're going to do a lot of experiential stuff. This isn't just, it's not going to be about me talking. This is going to be about people really getting into it. We can do that virtually. And we're seeing that we don't all have to fly all over the country or the world to make this happen. We can have people at the Open Center workshop that don't have to go to New York. They can be sitting at their homes in Paris or Buenos Aires or Quito, Ecuador, or wherever, and participate with us. And that's huge. We're learning. This coronavirus is pushing us. And I think this is the time to get rid of this new rise of oligarchy, which is the impetus behind the death economy. We must make this transition to a life economy. And we're making it. We're getting all these messages from the earth. Scientifically, you can say it's coming from the earth, or shamanically, but it's coming. We're getting the messages, and more people are listening, including a lot of business executives. But we all have to get behind this and push. And we have to touch that Jaguar. And when we touch that Jaguar, it tells us, change your perceptions and take actions.
And when I don't know if it was me, like the idea in your book, or not the idea, but your references to a death economy and a life economy. I hadn't, I think, thought of that black and white balance. And, I was thinking, well, and I think you mentioned this, we had a life economy for 49,000 of our 50,000 years as a population on the earth. I don't know. I was going to ask you, when did we transition from a life to a death economy?
So it's actually been 250,000 years that we've seen ourselves as human beings.
Okay.
And for almost all that time, we had life economies, and the indigenous people who live traditional lives, the ones that I've studied with, and you've been with some of them, still do. I think the transition, it started several thousand years ago, if you will, probably with the agricultural revolution. This is sort of the beginning. That's what I was. Yeah. But it really took off in 1976. So prior to 1976, I was in business school, and I learned that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, but he also takes good care of his employees, health insurance, pension funds, et cetera. And he takes good care of the communities where he works. He pays taxes. Imagine that, during up until fairly recently, during World War II and afterwards, for a number of years, major wealthy people were paying 90% tax rate, and corporations finance about 30% of our national budget. That's no longer true at all. And so corporations pay taxes, but they also contributed to recreational facilities, educational facilities. They played a role in helping the local environment. I was taught that in business school. 1976, Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. Now, Friedman said some good things, but the worst thing he said, and the thing that's had the biggest impact, is the only responsibility of business, he said, is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And he was a very influential person. He was an advisor to Reagan, to Thatcher, to many governments around the world, and extremely influential by saying that the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. We give the mandate to CEOs to do, it's a mandate, to do whatever they think it'll take, including corrupting politicians, destroying the environment, destroying the short-term, in the short term, destroying the resources they need in the long term, creating a death economy. And so 1976 was a pivotal point. But the good lesson here, Ross, is that one man made one statement. Now, it had been growing. It had been growing. He wasn't coming out of the blue. But our new movement toward a life economy, B corporations, all the things I mentioned earlier. There's been this movement. And now I think the coronavirus is pushing us to this moment where we are understanding that we've got to make a new statement, that the new perception that creates the new reality is that the goal of businesses is to maximize long-term benefits for everyone and nature. And the goal of every one of us as an individual is to maximize long-term benefits, not to maximize short-term consumer materialism, which we've
Long-term
come
happiness.
in part.
Yeah. Yes. I quick aside, one of my favorite teachers, my introductory to macroeconomics teacher, my freshman year of college, his name was David Johnson. It's why I got into economics. He used to refer to him as Uncle Milty.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was Milton Friedman's like name in the culture, or if that was just David called him Uncle Milty.
And a lot of people called him Uncle Milty, and I kind of looked at it a little bit, kind of like Uncle Mao, Mao Zedong, Uncle Mao, like, yeah. I mean, Friedman, he had some good concepts, there's no question, but he had this one that was very bad and totally insane. I mean, the idea of maximizing short-term consumer profits for a few wealthy investors, that's just pure oligarchy. And he was part of this movement, along with much of the media, along with much of the established business community. There was a movement to try to help the rich become richer and more powerful, this movement toward oligarchy. We've seen this throughout history. And as I said, we've seen it 3 previous times in the United States. Here it is again, and now it's time to change. And I think, we're seeing Trump is sort of almost a representative of that whole movement. And it seems as though even some of the Republicans are coming out pretty strongly against Trump at this point. I think, in a way, the shadow is being shown on this system that's no longer functional. And let's admit, Ross, it gave us great things. This system has given us amazing technology, science, the fact we can do what we're doing right now, this discussion, but it's reached a limit. And now we're seeing that shadow. And what creates a shadow? It's a light shining on a solid object. And how do you get rid of and the solid object here is the death economy. How do you get rid of that shadow? You raise the light, you raise consciousness. And when the light's directly overhead, the shadow's gone. And the light is rising. We're seeing more and more and more of the fallacy of this system that I helped to create.
Yeah, and I think I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Steph, earlier today, and we were talking about people want to throw away 2020. The idea of 2020 has been absolutely horrible. And she said, but I think it was really the reset, we needed, and that's a good thing. And I had this image of, I think it was Hillary when she was secretary giving, I don't remember, was it Putin or Medvedev, the reset button? We're going to reset U.S. relations with Russia. I don't remember if that was the 4 years Medvedev was the president or not, but it's a lot. Whether it's a reset that we needed as a society, I think that's analogous to, I like the way you did it. The light has to be all the way at the top so that there's no shadow. So tying this to the oligarchy idea, I had no idea we were going to get, I love that we're getting this much into, to understand the economy, you really need to understand history, because we didn't get this economy without what happened in the past. As power has continued to be consolidated, which is what happens as you build up the oligarchy, how do you wrestle it away from that? Or is it that it takes till it's too consolidated before it just blows up? Once so many entrenched stakeholders have power and influence, they don't want to let that go. That short-term profiteering economy, there's a lot of people that don't want to let that go. How does the rest of society wrestle that away?
Well, it takes a change of perception, first of all. So so what we're going through right now is a consciousness revolution. I'm blessed. I've been blessed since Confessions of an Economic Hitman came out in late 2004 to have the opportunity to travel all over the world, speaking at major events all over the world. And everywhere I go, I see that people are waking up to the fact that we live on a very fragile space station, the Earth. And we are the pilots. Human beings are the pilots. And we've been navigating her toward disaster. But we're waking up to that. We're shining that light on that shadow side of us that's navigating toward disaster. And people really, so there's a consciousness revolution going on.
Right.
It doesn't need to be a physical revolution. It's a consciousness revolution. But whenever there's a revolution, those who represent the status quo push back. They try to stop it because they think they got it made. They don't want change. And they do everything they can to convince the rest of us we don't want change. But we take energy from that. It's like, you learn, I've been a martial artist most of my life. If there's a guy who's a lot bigger and stronger than you, you don't try to overpower him. You use the energy, you turn it around, you gain from it. And that's what good agents of change do, or revolutionaries, whatever you want to call us. And we're in that process now, I think, of understanding that changing the perception is the first step. And to realize that so many of these people who are leading this revolution, the corporate executives, they're with us. They just don't know how to do that. And I think if we go back to that last time that we defeated the oligarchy, it was Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt said near the end of World War II, he met with a whole bunch of union representatives. At the end, he's shaking their hands as they're leaving the Oval Office. He says, I think you guys now understand that I'm with you, but now you've got to go out and get your rank and file, get the people to force me to do what I want to do the right thing, because I can't get it through Congress unless I've got the support of all your people. And that's where we're at right now, Ross, is that all of us who understand this, and this workshop we're going to go into is going to give people the power to know what each one of us can do in that regard. And we can all take different paths, but it's about really understanding that we've got to be behind this change of perception. We've got to move it forward. And in this time of the internet, of social networking, we've got so much power to do that. The oligarchies have taken over what we call the mainstream media, but the mainstream media is becoming irrelevant, because the mainstream now today is what we're doing right here.
Right.
And, I do a lot of podcasts and interviews every day by this media, and it's huge, and we can control it. And yes, there's a lot of crap going on around it too, but there's a great opportunity here.
I was going to ask you that if to create this change, the idea that our perception needs to change, to promote that idea, do we need the buy-in of, I was thinking of like, well, who controls most of our opinions? It's media, Hollywood, and big brands. Let's say just corporate or commercial, retail America. Do we need those three entities on our side here, or can we do this without them?
Well, we are doing it without them. We are doing it. And as we move forward, they will have to buy into us more and more.
Right.
I'm reminded of the American Revolution. So the British did everything they could in the early 1770s.
God damn it.
You're still on. The British did everything they could in the early 1770s to convince us that they were invincible, that the British were invincible. And then George Washington told a different story. He went to the Continental Congress, and he remembered a time 20 years earlier during the French and Indian War, where he'd been at the Battle of the Monongahela. He'd been in the army of General Braddock, who was considered Britain's best general at the time, huge army, marching through the forest of what is now Pennsylvania. And they were badly defeated by a much smaller band of French and Indians. And Braddock was killed. The general, most all of his officers were killed. Washington made it through. So 20 years later, after the French and Indian War, just before the American Revolution in the early 1770s, Washington went out and spoke, and he told the Continental Congress, and the word spread, a whole new story spread. No, the British aren't invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees. So in essence, what he was saying is, all we got to do is change the perception of what it means to be at war. And that changed everything. So it's a new story. We tell ourselves new stories. And right now, we are in the process of telling ourselves a story about the need to move from a death economy to a life economy, the need to help the polar bears, the need to stop the melting ice caps, the need, and we're seeing through this coronavirus how that impacts things. How when we cut back on industrial growth, we arrive at a situation where people can now see the stars over Los Angeles or Beijing or other places where in the past it was unusual to see the stars. So we're really getting this message. It's all about the story we tell ourselves. It's about the perception that we create. And people are telling the new story over and over and over again. We're all getting it. And corporations are buying into this. Major corporations are getting it. And if you think back 20 years ago, it was next to impossible to buy anything organic foods. Right. Now they're everywhere, Walmart has them, everybody has them. It's, but that took a while. If we think back not very long ago, the idea of same-sex marriages or transgender people becoming legitimately, just a few years ago, that was outrageous to even think about. Now it's part of our culture. And right. So, we change pretty rapidly and pretty easily once we change our perceptions. And now we've got to change our perception of what it means to be successful in every realm. So I can't judge the success of my book on how many people buy it, right, or how much money I make off it. That's irrelevant. What the measure is, will a few people read it and be impacted enough to go out and change their lives in the world? And that's it.
I think I'm an example of that. A message was on watching this. Hello, Itzhak. And, if it weren't for you, Itzhak would never have gone to the jungle and never had the experiences he had. If it weren't for Itzhak, I wouldn't have gone to Ecuador and had that experience. So that came through you. I'm wearing saying before, I got this from Don Jose Joaquin Pineda. Hello to Don Jose Joaquin Pineda, or maybe his granddaughter Angie may be watching. She lives in New York some of the time. And I know you're friends with Don Jose Joaquin Pineda because we talked about you bringing him to New York and to the Open Center years ago. So I think that idea of measuring success, I feel like I am a success story from you. Here I am working at the Open Center, absolutely in love with everything I'm doing because I get to have conversations with people like you. And I hope, and in the hope that these conversations inspire other people to take a similar path and change their perception.
Yeah.
So to me, like, I've read 2 of your, I think, 10 books, right?
Right.
Or a prolific writer.
Well, it's
so your first book and your last book, right? Those are the 2 that I've read.
Well, the first book was The Stress-Free Habit. That was written in the 80s.
Okay.
You're probably looking at Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which was actually the 6th book.
Oh,
but it was the first in the economic ones, and it's the one that sold over 2 million copies and close to 40 languages. It's been the big bestseller. But I wrote 5 books on shamanism. Those came first.
Okay.
And then I realized and I'll go into this during the workshop, the story of why I finally wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, because it was a terrifying thing to do. My life had been threatened if I wrote it. My daughter's life had been threatened. So it took me a long time to wake up to that courage.
John, I think that's a beautiful cliffhanger to leave people with for a reason to not only hear more of your story, but I think, as you said, to remind people, you want to give people the tools in their personal life to change their perception so that they can go and impact society that we've discussed needs to move from a death economy to a life economy. I think that is a lot of our mission at the Open Center. It's been your mission since the 70s.
Yeah, and my mission at the workshop is to offer some tools to help people create for themselves the life they most want for the rest of their lives, what they most want, but and also to see how that ties in with creating a better world and what barriers are getting in their way, to identify those, how to touch the Jaguars and the energy, the creativity, the courage, the wisdom, the patience, whatever they need that the Jaguar gives them to take the actions necessary. But my job really is to get out of the way
Yeah.
And the workshops that I do are very experiential. You know, I do some talking to explain things, and I take people on journeys. We'll be actually taking people on shamanic journeys during this process,
Oh,
and
wow.
they're very powerful to get out of the way and let people really go into their own thing, because it's different for all of us. You know, we can all take different paths. There's the carpenter's path, the plumber's path, the teacher's path, the writer's path, the you know, whatever it is. We all take different paths. But if we all head for the same destination, and that's to create the life that we really want for ourselves, and to create a life economy
Right.
for ourselves and our children and grandchildren, if we all take different paths, but we head to the same destination, that's powerful, and we get there, and it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. And we all need to enjoy this process. It needs to be fun. It needs to be enjoyable. It needs to be part of the gusto of life. I look forward to doing this. I love doing this work, as you can probably tell.
I can feel that you do, and I think that's a beautiful note to end on, which you just referenced, I think, to me, the most important lesson from the Bhagavad Gita, which is not to attach yourself to the fruits of your labor, to enjoy the labor. When you enjoy the labor, you don't care about the fruits at the end. It's about the process. So I look forward to us continuing these conversations, because it's about process. You've been an important part of my process. So I want to thank you, you know, really. And it means a lot to me to be able to get on this Zoom call with you here, and hopefully we'll see each other in person soon. But John, just again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Ross. And thank you for those good words. And thank you for all the amazing work that the Open Center does, that you and the Open Center do.
Hasta luego to our audience. We'll see you guys soon. Bye.